All right, hey guys, welcome back. We are on part two of Patricia and Gavin Agnew and the Why Did I Get Married series. So now we're looking at the fact that they lost their child. Now, when they are sat at the table where the truths begin to come out, it comes out that when the child passed away due to the car accident, that the husband went to one of his guy friends and expressed that he blamed his wife for the child having passed away in the car accident. Now, with that, it was also revealed as well that though she was walking around like perfect Patty, everybody knew that she wasn't because of said car accident for not strapping the child in properly in the vehicle. So when you have a scenario where it can be a detrimental rift to a marriage, and I mean detrimental rift to a marriage, when the child's death could have been one prevented and it appears to be the cause of the other that it occurred. Do you understand what I'm saying? She did not strap the child into the car properly. Thereby, when the car accident occurred, the child died. So, how do two people that are carrying a burden of a child passing deal with those issues? Number one, they need to, what do we always need to do? Communicate. The biggest issue between Patricia and Gavin was that because Patricia was a counselor and she knew how to talk these things out, the problem is, have you ever heard the saying that a doctor cannot diagnose themselves? For one, pride will not allow you to actually see the real problem when you are the one that has it. You can see it for everybody else, and this is true for just about anybody. Notice yourself when you need to check yourself on certain things. You have the tendency to be able to pick out everybody else's problems, but it's so much harder for you to look back at self and identify that problem. Don't let yourself be in a position that you are in a position that you do this all the time. You're not going to recognize your own problem. And if you are, the problem that Patricia had was she did not want to deal with the problem. But there was a conversation that was later had in the next film where it was identified that Patricia had a bit of a mean streak. And she had settled herself to a solitude that she was not going to allow herself to go there. Let's just have this conversation while we're here. For all my Christian women, we have a tendency that we do not want to deal with our emotions or angers with another person because we do not want to offend. We do not want to risk our Christianity or to be honest. I was looking, and it's so funny. It was a commercial came on the other day. I don't even remember who said it, but it said that some scholar said that if you are afraid of offending, you cannot be honest. And that should be the definition of every Christian. Because a lot of Christians are afraid of offending people. Because to speak your fullness of truth also means that you may have to be perceived as being arrogant, boisterous, hard to deal with, and people will try to put you in a box when you are that kind of person. And as a Christian, we have the tendency to be like, if I share my opinion, people are not going to like me because of the fact that it can come off as I don't give two about this situation. It's not that we don't, it's the fact that either we have to choose to be positive and to look at the bright side all of the time, but even yet and still, there's a part of us that deals with squelching the Holy Spirit because there's a righteous indignance that will rise up within us over time. We will see this later on in Patricia and Gavin's relationship. Because you always, when you're perfect, and this is Patty's nickname, Perfect Patty, Perfect Patty, she's Perfect Patty, she's Perfect Patty, perfect, 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 perfect. We as children of God, because we do not want to risk our sanctity and the righteousness that we walk in with God, that we may actually come into a state of self-righteousness. And being that we feel like we need to control everything, and this is what Patty's problem was. I will have to control, including my own emotions. She was trying to control the situation. That even the day that they left the cabin and they were in the car, Gavin said, "Are you going to talk to me?" She said, she just waved a hand at him like, I can't even with you. I can't even with you. 6 months later, they are, she comes home from work. And she comes home early figuring she's going to make dinner for them. And he wants to talk. He wants to talk about it. She says, "I want to make dinner. What do you want?" He says, "We need to talk about this." She is a classic avoidance personality. Sometimes when you have a lot of things on your plate, you have the tendency to be more likely to avoid checking in with self, dealing with issues that you have. Because for one, if you deal with yourself, that means that you may have to deal with emotions and opening up a can of worms that you aren't emotionally ready to handle. Okay? This is something that we've also had to deal with our God-ordained spouses. Because a lot of us have been wondering, what's taking them so long? Why have they not reached out to us? Blah, blah, blah. They have been processing their own emotions in relation to the stuff that they've been dealing with in their own situations and scenarios. They ain't got nothing to do with us. And while they processing that stuff, we can't be there. I witnessed at one particular point in time when two people were in a relationship, and the person that was in the relationship kept trying to interfere with that person's process, and they kept breaking up. Why? Because she was not supposed to be involved with his process. Now, as a married couple, you have to have enough respect for your spouse to give them space. But when it comes to a point, you have to bring to their attention, I understand you are grieving this situation, and I understand that you may not even want to talk to me about this, but I think you need to talk to somebody about this situation. For such a loss in which they had, she needed to talk to somebody, was the first defense that she gave. I am a therapist. Why do I need to talk to anybody? Because you need to process your own emotions. She was not processing her own emotions in relation to this situation. Because she's known as Perfect Patty, she holds herself to that standard. She won't even let herself feel her own emotions. She was not processing it. And she figured, I let time pass. It had been years since the child had passed away. This wasn't a recent death of this child. It was some time that had passed. It wasn't a fresh death. But even yet and still, she was trying to do all the things that she knew to do. All of the techniques that she had figured out. All of the psychological mumbo jumbo between the two of them, but was doing everything but dealing with it. And even her husband was getting frustrated with that. And this is what brought them to this point. He's like, we need to deal with this. We need to talk about this. I have witnessed in a couple of the people that I follow who are actually going through either reconciliation with their God ordained spouses or in the process of waiting on the Lord to reconcile them with their spouses. And they talk about how dealing with certain issues, their biggest breakthroughs come with the fact that they do not avoid the issue, but they face it head on. They face the pain. They face all of the issue that comes with it. And I know for a scenario like this, what this couple was going through in relation to a death of a child, that's drastic, especially when one of the people feels and knows that they are the fault for the reason. And it's not so much the fact that there is a blame in the scenario. She knows what was done and she blames herself. But instead of admitting that she blames herself, she would rather avoid it because she feels like everybody blames her. And with that, of finding out that her own husband at one point in his anger did blame her. We're going to get on Mike and Sheila. It's going to happen. Because that was a form of manipulation for how that information came out. And he shared that information with Mike in confidence. Not so much that he was even being honest. You know how like when you're angry about a situation, you start talking? And because you are talking it out, whether you meant it or not, in that moment, if you have somebody like that listening to you, they're going to twist it around on you. He probably didn't feel that way. It was just in the moment. In that moment, he did. And he said what he felt in that moment at the time that the wound was fresh. So when this conversation finally came out, I don't know how many years later after this child has passed, she's like, I didn't know that you blamed me. And he was finally able to say, I don't blame you. I was angry at the time. I don't care what situation that you and your God ordained spouse are going through. You need to, one, talk it out. Yes, you're going to have moments. This is why they tell you whenever you are angry, tired, or hungry, do not have discussion. Secondly, we know the enemy tries to bring about a wedge between a marriage. Don't be talking to the wrong people about your emotions. Go to confidants. Okay. Now you know. They knew that that one friend was a little bit twisted. Now, some of the stuff they never consciously told him. It was because the wives were talking to Sheila that this information got back to him. And he decided to spill the beans because she talked to him. Be careful of who you are sharing your information with when you are married. Because if you share with somebody who has a mouth to talk, your information very well might be with an enemy that can bust up your situation. Okay? Be careful of who you talk to because you don't know who you're talking to is talking to. You understand what I'm saying? I hope I'm making myself clear. Getting back to specifically them, she freaks out, finally has an emotional breakdown because she's like perfect Patty, perfect Patty messed up. She had to come to the understanding that the name Perfect Patty was not something that she could uphold. The pedestal in which she had been put on, or people had put her on, she could not live up to, and she was not the person in which created that name. So she had to be taken off of her pedestal, off of her controlling aspect, and come down to a place of humility and human feelings in order for her to be able to deal with, in that moment, at the very least, feeling the feelings necessary for this experience. Okay? Within the next few months, they got themselves together. Because Perfect Patty made them sit up there and do the exercise of a piece of paper, positives and negatives, and they went through it. And decided that they were going to go through that process and help heal their relationship. She had her award at the end of the first film. So I do not know how much time, well, I'm assuming that it is about the same time that we saw, about 5-6 years passed between films. So about 5 or 6 years later, we meet Patricia and Gavin again. When we meet them as the first couple to arrive to the second retreat we have seen them on. And she is emotionally distraught. You can tell this. And he's trying to talk with her. She's doing the same thing that she did in the first film when the information came out about Gavin having lied about the towel. She gave him what? The hand, and said, no, I don't want to talk about it. They had just arrived at the location and they were waiting for the rest of the couples to show up. And he tried to say something to her and she gave him that same wave off, which means they again were back in the same position. Something either had transpired, or what was assumed to have been the problem being fixed was not fixed by the beginning of the second film. There was a rift there. Now remember, this is the couple that does not talk about their personal business. Okay? So by the time everybody arrived, she distracted with focusing on making sure everybody else was okay. I believe that they tried to ask her how she was doing, but she waved it off. She would deflect. Her natural move in the marriage was to deflect. She didn't want to talk about something, she would immediately move to somebody else's situation. Oh, hey, such and such. Somebody asked her a question, she moved it on to such and such. So she would deflect the conversation. Later that evening, they were talking, and everybody's having a calm, peaceful time, and everybody's engaging in conversation. She's still being Patricia and talking about specific things that they talk about for the vacation, like, because they are like the central couple that brings the rest of the couples together for conversation. But notice they never talk about themselves at this vacation. So everybody's seemingly doing well. They're in the Bahamas, everybody's good, and then they're kind of also dealing with the other issue we're going to discuss when we get to the Sheila and Mike and Troy situation. So, later that night, Diane and Terry are in their room, and they hear Patricia and Gavin arguing, which to them is like, wait a minute, this is Patricia and Gavin. What do you mean Patricia and Gavin are arguing? They don't argue. They're like the poster couple for all of us. What are they arguing about? And you could hear through the wall that he was talking about her book and something else in relation, and she was like, no, we're not gonna talk about that. And she does what she does, which is avoidance. She walks out the room. When she steps out to go downstairs, Diane comes out and says, hey, Patricia, is everything all right? She says, I'm fine. And you see that it's a mechanical answer when she gives it. It's mechanical as in, I'm fine. I'm fine. Meaning like she's trying to convince herself that she is fine, but you can look in her face and see that she is anything but fine. She said, I'm just going to go downstairs and I'm going to get some water. She's like, oh, I'll come down with you. No, I'm fine. And you can hear the crack in her voice. Like, I'm at my emotional wits and I need me time. What it is her perfect pattiness is starting to break. She's having a break in her perfection. And she's not dealing with it. She operates in avoidance. She will not deal with any emotional thing with anyone else. She won't talk to anybody about it. She will sit and she will deal with self. But she don't want her friends to see her cry. She doesn't want her husband to deal with that. She will not deal with the actual issue. And I guarantee you, the reason that they were arguing in the first place is because of something in relation to the fact that she wasn't dealing with her emotions in relation to something else that was going on, which we will later find out. Because she's trying to keep herself together. When you are a person, and I dealt with this problem too, when you have stressful situations and your life isn't going in the direction in which you feel that it should be going, you have a tendency that you grasp at the parts of your life that you can control. If I can control how people observe me, if I can control how this, that, and the other, if I can control my job stays in my job, my marriage stays in my marriage, my friends stay in my friend zone. I do not allow my personal issues to cross into my friendships. I do not allow our marriage issues to cross into this area. And everything will be fine as long as I can keep the control boxes in their box. Because I'm Patricia Agnew. I can control all of this. But the problem is she couldn't control it. We, and especially as we're walking with God, we cannot operate in the spirit of control. because God is the ultimate control person. I'll tell you this. I remember there was a time period in which I was dealing with something in one season, and I was not dealing with my emotions. God got me together real quick, fast, in a hurry, because I was consecrating with him, and I was drinking water. And when I started to drink water, during certain season, he needed me to deal with certain emotions that I am holding back. Oh, I started crying like a baby out of nowhere. I can't tell you how many times I've laid on the couch and just tears came out of nowhere because God needed me to deal with my personal emotions. Not to say that Patricia wasn't dealing with it, but she was dealing with it to herself. But the fact that she was not expressing it to the people that cared about her, it was not allowing them to help her because she had to be in control at all times. For anybody that this is touching on, please recognize yourself within it and deal with yourself accordingly. Which means you need to what? Circumcise your heart, possibly go on a consecration with the Lord and deal with the things that you need to deal with. The best thing that ever happened to me was going into consecrations because I had to force myself to deal with the parts of me, and God will automatically, if you ask him to, he will show you the parts of you. That I remember it was somebody I know. She used to tell us to pray, Lord, I give you all of the parts of me. Show me me. Some of you will not ask the Lord to show you you. This was what she was having the problem with. She would not face herself. She would be able to hold the mirror up to everybody else but herself. And she was cracking under the pressure of keeping up the persona of perfect Patty that no one was asking her to keep. But she felt she needed to. Because when you don't feel like you're in control of certain elements of your life, the parts that you can hold and control and manipulate to be within the boxes in which you have the ability to control, you do it. People do that. And this comes with circumcision of thy heart in order for you to allow the Lord to deal with those dark places that you won't let anybody else deal with. But with the dealing with those things, she also needed to talk to her husband. The biggest issue that she had altogether with this whole thing is that she was not communicating with her husband. Now, one might say, well, she's always doing exercises and something. She was doing actions and activities. You ever heard of a person that was that will keep themselves busy doing something, but it actually has no effect? And it's a scripture that says this. Oh my goodness. Hold on. I got the way that seems right to a man, the end thereof is death. But that's not the scripture I was looking for. I'm going to have to come back to you with that one. I'm going to have to come back to this video, figure out what the scripture was, and I'm going to come back in the next part maybe and possibly tell you what that is. But she was operating in her own mindset. And it was bringing about a death towards her relationship because she had to be in control of it. And as we go forth in the film, we gain even more understanding that the more control she has over it, the less control she actually has. Okay? So after her breakdown, the next day, We see her with the girlfriends. We see her all of this, but you notice that she's not really hanging out with the rest of them or in engaging communication with her spouse. She's more distracted. There was another issue that was going on, and it was more important to talk about that issue than to actually deal with talking about her own. So it came down to the end of the vacation, and they were down to a point, it was the 4th of July or something like that, and they ran into an older couple, and the couple was explaining their personal story of how they met and went through their issues. And I might highlight them at a point just to make a point for something. But everybody stood and told their story about where their relationship was, and everybody was doing pretty okay. Aside from the distraction that the confusion of that particular character had brought, which we will discuss when we get to Mike and Sheila. So when Patricia and Gavin go up to speak their piece, he's trying to be peaceable about it. And she just straightforwardly says, I'm getting a divorce from Gavin. Number one fact that we come to the understanding of in this, Patricia is so desperate to not have her emotions dealt with or put on display. The very thing that she's trying to avoid is actually happening. She was standing in front of everybody and had to say that she was in the middle of a divorce. And she outrightly did it because she was trying to distract. Why? Because she didn't want to deal with her emotions. Because you could tell that he didn't want the divorce. In that moment, he did not want that divorce, but she was forcing the issue. Why? She's running from something. What is she running from? What would be the obvious thing in which she would be running from? The death of their son. So Perfect Patty's trying to make it right for everybody without dealing with her own emotions in this situation. So the best thing she felt was to run. Okay, we're getting a divorce. Why? Because that way she remains in control and does not have to relinquish control by opening up and breaking